As we observe Nelson Mandela International Day in a month, we reflect on some of his values and principles and sage words. There is no passion to be found playing small in setting for a life that is less than the one you are capable of living. In another, he said, there can be no greater gift than that of giving one's time and energy to help others without expecting anything in return. These are just some of the qualities reflected by some of the Forbes Africa 30 under 30. Busi Mkhumbuzi, to my right, is an entrepreneur who was the host of the Mandela Lecture, the 19th one, delivered by former US President Barack Obama. And Joe Human Nawaya is a creative entrepreneur, and that is with AMP brand identity. You're a developer born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, raised in Belgium and South Africa, so citizen of the world. We'll talk to you both about your journeys. But Busi, let's first start with you. So I think it's apt to note that you are the daughter of 1976 student activists. Mm. So I'd imagine you would have some sort of affinity and connection to brand Madiba.
Definitely. So I was privileged in that sense because I heard the stories from home. It was, you know, I didn't have to wait for June 16 to hear about the perspective of my parents during the time. I was told about all our heroes. I was told about the struggle itself, how it was fought and how it was won over. And I always tell people that my sense of activism was nurtured at home, and it was channeled in a number of ways from that point on. So I always credit my parents for the kind of person that I am.
I believe
and the kind
they
of
even had you putting up posters
yeah.
as a young child.
Yeah, I was like a community activist. Like if I go home today, they still call me mistress, teacher. I used to bring a group of kids around, do after school lessons, teaching English, teaching maths, put up plays, raise money, put up dances, all kinds of things. We really were activists before we understood what the term even meant.
So yeah. Even social justice is something that, as the saying would be, sucked from the teat. You were brought up with it, you were nurtured with it.
Yeah, it's like it's a moral compass. So, you know how other people grew up and their parents, for example, motivated them to play soccer or to play chess. I was raised to really put people at the center of everything that I do. So to this day, my dad asks me, are you showing traits of a leader in what you're doing? And I'm constantly convicted by that.
So ethical leadership is at the core of what you were brought up with, what you want to emulate.
Yeah, it's completely what I'm passionate about. And that's why even today, as an entrepreneur, I'm not just in the market doing normal day-to-day business. What I'm doing is I'm using the market-based system to act out my activist values, to act out social justice. Because I'm a CSI practitioner, which means that I sit at the table with SMEs, companies, government, wealthy individuals, and I try to leverage their 1% net profit to see how we can give back, how we can transform communities. Because for me, it's more than like legislative requirements and BEE and affirmative action. For me, it's also about the moral imperative that companies have to give back.
Joe, I'm going to come to you in just a moment, but I am interested in something that I believe that your journey when you were taking public transport between the townships and where you were going to school in the suburbs, that stoked something in you. What was it? Was it the stark reality of inequality?
Yeah, it was. I mean, you hear about inequality, you read about it in the newspapers, it's always black and white. But when you're actually commuting between suburb and township every day, it gains color and meaning. When you start to see that my life is, in fact, very different from the life of a peer in another part of the country. And for me, inequality suddenly had meaning. It was a spectrum, there was color, it was a real dichotomy, and the passion, you know, bubbled from there.
Joe, let me come to you. I mean, you've had quite a fascinating one. So born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, living in Belgium, and just those two historically alone are mind-blowing, and I'm sure you know what you mean from a political standpoint. And then you come and live in a country like South Africa, which would have survived apartheid, and with the influence of a man like Nelson Mandela. How have you then just taken this to be your life's work and passion?
I think the most important thing for me was just trying to understand more of like our history and our narrative, and more like how do we then own that, and how do we create things that can exist into society and into the global world, because we see it a lot of times where people from overseas come into the African continent and they experience what we have, and they leave and they write their own narratives about our own experience, you know. But we as a people here don't actually really own that, and we don't express it in the ways that can actually lead to creating employment, you know, can lead to creating different initiatives that can actually benefit society.
And interesting, because you're nominated for the creative industry. You say when you were young, your parents bought you a computer and paint was your favorite. So how do you translate all of that in what you do?
And it wasn't easy at first because, I mean, we're in a black family where everyone thinks, look, you need to be a doctor, you need to be an engineer, you know, you need to be a scientist or whatnot. So going into the creative space was, for me, first of all, I had to convince my parents that, look, this is really what I wanted to do. And I had to prove myself in that light, you know. So just checking back, you know, like the difficulties also for like a black person to get into the creative space was very difficult because it's a very white-owned space, you know. So getting there and actually being able to create something that could exist.
So how do you translate that into the black person's struggle on the continent and in a country like this, where you give them hope, where you bring light and empowerment into their lives?
Storytelling, you know. A lot of us relate to the things that we see because it's something that I've gone through, it's something that I've come from, you know. And using storytelling, has been my key to basically making people understand where we come from, where we want to go.
So we're going to talk about your podcast in just a moment. So I want to come to you, Busi, about Tshimong and how you became a co-owner, that you just been to DC and all of that. So how did you then take from those experiences and bring them here to...
So I had no intention initially to even start my own organization. My goal was always to work in corporate, but my co-founders, who at the time were debating heavyweights and like intellectual SRC Vids guys, Tamipo and Bongani Masilela, was starting to build their own movement, their own organization, and called it Tshimong. And I joined them about, I think, 3 or 4 months after they'd started, sort of bringing in my perspective as a activist, but also as someone who was studying commerce at the time. And then we sort of formalized it, we registered it, loans from our family members to get it started. But from there, it really grew into something incredible. And I think it's because we've been
Which is what?
Authentic.
So people who are not familiar with your work, Blueprint, etc. So what is it?
So it started off as an organization that was partnering with the private and public sector to create debating programs to engage and empower young people, to essentially say, are we listening to young people, really, or are we listening to them at a tokenistic level? And we were creating platforms where people who are in prominent positions could now hear the views of young people. We've transformed from that point to now providing CSI services, in the sense that we create bespoke social investment vehicles unique to clients' brands. We manage their funds. We also provide strategic consulting to help them reinvest into the community, especially where young people are concerned, more broadly than just debating.
So for you, Joe, the digital space, and that brings you under the spotlight of Forbes Africa 30 under 30. What is unique about what you're doing, including your podcasts?
I think one thing for me is always about giving value. You know, I've always had Twitter, but I've never actually used it to my potential. And I remember last year, because I've been putting out so much brand work, and I get a lot of emails and requests, you know, people asking me like brand questions. And I actually got so frustrated that on one Sunday evening, I was like, you know what, let me actually put out a thread on how to build a brand. And it blew up on Twitter. And ever since then, I noticed that the digital space right now, because there's so much noise, you know, everyone's trying to be noticed.
And it's not the right kind of noise.
Exactly. And it's very difficult to filter through that because everyone's fighting for space, right? Everyone's fighting for space to be seen. And once you're able to create value and give people value, you have the attention.
I need to ask you this. Africa's brand has often been negative, especially from a Western perspective, and very much intertwined with poverty, hunger, and debt. So if you were to give brand identity for Africa and its potential, how would you encapsulate it?
Ooh, That's a very interesting one. I think collaboration. I think once we can actually come together and put our skills together, we are then able to really communicate what Africa is about as a brand more effectively than just having one person do it, because we are all coming from different walks of life. And once we can bring all those skills together and the creativity, we can definitely create something that will be mind-blowing.
Busi, so where do you see your future going forward? You've gotten into the space somewhat accidentally, but it speaks to what you're doing. Where do you see the future of young people like you on the continent?
So and it ties into the work that I'm doing and the question that you just asked. For me, you know, I see the work that I do as a developmental imperative. It's redistributive work, and it's saying to companies that you have an obligation to upskill the people who are going to inherit the future. And I believe that if we own more space, if there's more collaboration within the space, there's more validation for the work that we do, more companies sit at the table with us, government endorses the work that we do, then there's a lot of potential that can be unlocked with young people in terms of them, you know, actualizing. I don't believe young people need to be motivated. I feel they need access. All right.
In 30 seconds, Joe, your future?
My future is continuing the story of Africa, continue telling it out there, even just on the podcast, just profiling more people that are actually doing real work, that are impacting society and creating real value for the people that are on the ground.
All right, thank you so much to both of you. It was really a pleasure speaking to you, candidates for the Forbes Africa 30 under 30 list. As we mentioned, Busi Mkhumbuzi, an entrepreneur who is the host of the Mandela Lecture delivered by Barack Obama, and Joe Human Nawaya, creative entrepreneur and AMP brand identity developer, born in the DRC, raised in Belgium and South Africa. And that's it from us for today. Thank you so much for joining the team of African Perspective. It is half-time in that match against Nigeria and South Africa. Nigeria still leading by 1 goal. And of course, you can stay tuned to watch for more. Join us again next week, Wednesday, as we continue with our theme of Mandela Month. Goodbye.